No, I wasn't speaking. So, I think you...
Pleasant.
Oh, is that why they do that?
Okay.
At Monument.
So
Oh, that's why they do that then.
we could,
They should reevaluate that, though. Anyway,
are we,
it's my 2 cents.
are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay.
Just what I needed, thank you.
Are you ready? Okay, we're going to begin. So, welcome everyone in the audience to Tuesday, February 12th, Wenham Board of Selectmen meeting. This meeting was actually called to order just around 5 o'clock. We had 2 executive sessions between then and now, and we're ready to, we have voted to return to open session. And we will begin our open session, as we always do, with public input for items that are not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will move on to our announcements, and I am going to move the gentleman up, so I know that you're anxious to going, but we just have a couple of announcements. And the first one, I believe, has to do, oh, let me stop for a second. One of our selectmen, John Clemenzi, is not with us tonight. He is ill, so Jack and I are here. I thought of that because announcements were actually going to be John's responsibility tonight, but they're mine. And so I'd like to invite Diane Bucco to come up to talk to us about the much anticipated winner of Wenham's Cutest Dog Contest.
Yes.
And give us an update on the election.
And then the election.
Secondarily, after we get
Thank
the
you very
dogs.
much for letting me come in today. I know it's a busy day, crazy weather. But just to let you know, as of January 31st, we had 490 dogs registered. We normally register about 600, so that's quite a good percentage that came in before the late fee starts. We had 41 dogs enter the contest, and voting went from February 1st through February 11th, yesterday, to win a gift basket that's donated by Lisa Kane, owner of Wags Doggy Daycare. Out of 120 ballots cast, the top dog with 18 votes, or 15%, was Patches Brown. Did you hear that?
Oh,
Patches Brown. They're going to be very excited. Dog number 4.
Oh, very cute dog, yeah.
Okay. Second place, I even had to do, came to Mac Montoya
That one won for the...
with 15 votes. Third dog is Jimmy Petro with 11 votes.
I feel like that dog was one before.
He did win before. Mac Montoya they were all winners last year as well, just not top winners.
Okay. Maybe.
The dogs that received 4 or more votes will be in the Wenham calendar. And the rest of the dogs were Winnie Colano, Brady Gazarowski,
Oh, Brady.
Rando Marks,
What the years on that one?
My ears.
Darla Johnson.
Oh.
Last year I did it on a PowerPoint. It was easier to see. I grant you that. This one is a tough one. Lackerly Jewett.
That could be my dog.
Walter, but not Walter Bucco.
different
Walter
Walter.
French. The other cute Walter. A very famous dog here, Ada Roebuck.
Ada Roebuck. Yeah, that one might.
Uh-huh.
In-house. Yeah.
Gunther Sampson. And Winnie O'Toole.
Winnie O'Toole.
So they will be in the calendar. Thank you to everyone who entered and to everyone who registered their dogs in a timely fashion. As we know, registering dogs is a mass general law, and I hope that all owners do register either online or in my office. So the calendar will be available hopefully by March 1st. It'll go March through February. So the basket, by the way, is a beautiful basket with lots of fun things in it, and allow me just to show you one of the big
Holy
things.
cow. That's bigger than my dog.
So next year,
That is bigger than my dog.
I know.
Right?
Yeah, your dog would have a good, your 2
Yeah.
dogs. could
I
be-
have 2 dogs.
Okay.
Sure, a corner.
Back to town clerk stuff. Town elections. The town election is on Thursday, April 11th. We vote here at Wenham Town Hall from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. We will have absentee ballots. So if you need one, if you will not be available to vote on Thursday, April 11th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., you just need to let me know in the clerk's office, and we will make arrangements to get you to vote early. Nomination papers are now available for the following seats: the Board of Assessors, the Board of Health, Library Trustees, the Moderator, the Planning Board, the Regional School Committee, the Board of Selectmen, the Water Commissioner, and the Wenham Housing Authority. There are nomination papers taken out for every seat except for the 3 school committee seats. They could be taken out, they take them out from the school offices, and I have not heard. But if anyone's interested in getting involved, there doesn't seem to be a big competition to get on the school committee, so it would be a great spot to start.
So this, what we have is a little outdated, so you
Yes, so yes,
papers for,
planning board. Yep.
that's good news.
School committee used to be a contested position.
Yeah, I had to run against 5 other people one of the years I ran.
Do you want to know who's taking out papers, or we save that for another day?
I think we can wait. for that.
Okay.
I would be interested to know the dates, though. by
So the
which-
dates that nomination papers are due back to me is, I believe it's a Thursday, February 21st?
That's right.
Is it Thursday, February 21st, first.
And has the deadline passed for taking out?
We don't have a deadline to take out papers. We only need 21
It's the same day.
registered voters, and I believe you could take them out, go somewhere and get 21
I
registered.
think we've had that happen,
Yes,
actually.
yes, so that's possible.
Yeah, I recall.
And that's everything. So February, I'll be contacting the election officers to schedule a training and get them involved for town election and town meeting, which is on Saturday, April 6th at 1 p.m. at Bucher.
Okay. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I know, looks heavy, actually. So next on our agenda are reports. We have what looks to be a fairly short report from our town administrator.
There's a couple other things on the agenda tonight that may have taken a little bit of time. Yeah, just a couple quick personnel updates. First one, John Gray, police sergeant, longstanding member of the department, almost 30 years on the department, will be retiring in March. So obviously, I'm sure there will be a chance down the line to formally thank him, but just want to acknowledge his years of service. It's a lot of years working here in town. And so that posting has gone up. Chief Perkins has put up a posting. Deadline is February 22nd, so next Friday. And just because of the 2 new reserves that we've hired to fill the other 2 vacancies in the department, for this particular position, looking for somebody who has a minimum of 5 years full-time experience to try to start to replace some of the institutional knowledge that we've lost in the past 6+ months.
Are we expecting internal candidates for that job?
No, because the reserves, none of the reserves have that level of full-time experience.
They have patrolmen who aren't sergeants.
Well, yeah, so no, I'm talking about hiring a patrolman. Then there
So
will be a
that's-
promotion from, presumably from within for
Okay.
the sergeant position. We're not looking to hire a new sergeant, we're
Right,
looking to
okay.
hire a new
gonna
patrolman,
be
and
my
then
question.
after that
it.
position is filled, then there'll be a process to fill,
Got it.
decide who is promoted to sergeant.
Okay.
And then
It wasn't clear from what I heard before.
No, I was going to ask the same question.
Yep, one other check-in, the library director submission deadline is today. Screening committee met last week. We're planning to meet again next week to review the applicant pool and invite in a number of candidates for preliminary interviews with the screening committee sometime in the next few weeks, either end of February, beginning of March. Just an update on that. That's it.
Okay, I have no individual special report tonight, unless, Jack, you have anything. We'll move on to the consent agenda.
Well, I have 2 items in the consent agenda. One was the minutes of December 4th, but I just got those 3 or 4 days ago from Catherine, so that I haven't reviewed them, so I'm not prepared to recommend on that. I don't know how they got in here before me, anyway.
Okay, and
Because I always email Nikki when, after I reviewed them, copy them anyway. So I'm going to pass on that.
okay,
Next is the $1,000 donation to the Veterans Committee for Wreaths Across America. We're very pleased to have a $1,000 donation from the treasurer of the Air Force Association, Paul Revere Chapter. Compliments of Mike Therian, who was the treasurer. And that the Veterans Committee this morning gratefully acknowledge the gift and sign some paperwork that was required to sign to accepting the gift. It was obviously unanimous that they wanted to accept the gift. We're very pleased about that. Next year, I think they're going to be looking to raise $5,000 so they can double the amount of wreaths that they put on the veterans' graves this year. So I guess that needs an approval from, no, it's the consent agenda, it doesn't need approval, that's right.
Yeah, well, we do have to vote on the consent agenda.
All right.
And we've actually removed one item from the consent agenda. So,
The December 4th meeting minutes.
well, and the executive session of the 27th.
It's only the 4th. Only,
There are two sets of,
yeah, just let me look at it again. So the first thing I saw was December 4th, and I know I just got those.
Then there's an executive session number 3 from November 27th.
I reviewed that, so we can actually vote that one. Let me see,
so,
where does it say the November 22nd down?
November 27th. It's
What page is that on?
right after the minutes for the December minutes. It's 1, 2, 3
I
pages
see,
of
okay,
December
it's the
and
last page, right?
Yes.
Okay, I've reviewed that. It's okay.
So, we're not approving, we haven't yet had to take something out of the consent agenda.
Well, let's figure it out.
I know, that's what I'm just trying to figure out. I think that we have to.
Motion to remove.
To remove that. I think we have to actually need a motion to remove the
December
minutes.
4th minutes.
Right.
I make that motion.
I second it.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now, we can vote on the rest of the consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda as amended.
I forget that I have to second things. Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those executive session, are they just approved and held?
Yes.
What'd you say?
The executive session minutes are approved and held.
Yeah, they're not
Yeah.
approved and released.
Right. And held.
Okay.
Close to our heart, right.
So now we're in new business, and we will take new business out of order tonight because we have some, I don't know, part of the family, I wouldn't say guests exactly, but we have some firefighters here. So we're going to move right down to item I, which I believe is Jack's, and it has to do with the review of the fire-based EMS pilot program.
Is that in my other
That's
book?
binder number 2.
Oh, yeah.
Aye. All right. We have two of our outstanding captains here, Jeff and Danny, and that, I'll just read the draft motion and they can take it from there. Based on the overall success of the one-year pilot program and consistent with the recommendations of the fire chief, Steve Kavanaugh, I move to approve the continuation of providing fire-based basic life support emergency medical services on a permanent basis effective March 27, 2019. Take it away, guys.
Well, I'll second it, just so we can
Good.
have discussion. Okay.
So, since the ambulance started on March 26th of 18 through December 31st, these are the numbers that are based. So we've done 117 patient refusals, 5 list assists, 5 well-being checks, 167 BLS transports, and on top of that, there were 27 ALS intercepts, which Atlantic comes in, and then there were 13 alternative transports, which was Atlantic coming in because of multiple calls or something like that. So that gave us a grand total of 313 calls, which averaged about 30 a month. Out of the 313 calls, it resulted in patient contact 336 times. Because possibly a motor vehicle accident, there's multiple patients and we get refusals or whatnot. So this number came from refusals at a single incident. The projected number of ALS calls was 15%. We're currently staying below that at 11.5%. Out of the 313 calls, we transported 194 times, which equals, well, almost 62% of a transport rate, which is good.
That's pretty high.
The average staffing personnel responding to each, including motor vehicle accidents, carbon monoxide, we're still staying about 7, getting 7 responders. Over the past several years, the average number of personnel per call was 9. It's dropped due to a decrease in EMTs. We used to have 22, right now we're in about 17. And there's a couple more in class right now to bring our numbers up a little bit. Our average response times for the ambulance to arrive on scene is 5 minutes and 57 seconds. The monthly average response times had varied from a high of 6 minutes and 18 seconds to a low of 5 minutes and 5 seconds, which those are incredible. The threshold's about 8 minutes.
It's very, very good.
It's very impressive.
Just for comparison purposes, with our prior contract with Lions and then Cataldo, our minimum response time threshold was responding 90% of the time in 12 minutes or less.
So,
What was their average response time? I thought it was 8 minutes or so, something like that. Was it?
It's come down a little bit.
Oh, there.
They were 8+.
Yeah.
They did have,
yeah.
you know, they were out a lot further, Salem Hospital and things, when they'd be responding back to our town.
Yeah, so this is an improved service in terms of response time.
Absolutely.
Which could be
It's
good.
great.
All the guys, what they're putting into it, it's just incredible. So the payer mix for the town of Wenham was projected at a 50-50 split. It's currently at a 60-40 between residents who will be covered by private insurance providers and those covered by Medicare, Medicaid. The reimbursement rates for these federal programs are much lower. It's about a $400 fee for BLS for Medicare and Medicaid, where the privates are a lot higher, or a negotiated rate. Through Pro EMS, the billing company for Wenham, they've billed out since March 26 to December 31st an amount of $255,206.50. After contractual and manual allowances and also write-offs, our current net is about $201,819.68.
Approximately.
Very good.
Checks from the insurance carriers take roughly 3 to 6 months to process. They're sent to our account when we now receive checks on a regular cycle. We get emails daily letting us know they're coming. The town has also received approximately $68,559.87 in payments to date of the 31st of December. At this time, we have a collection rate of about 34.5%, it's actually a little bit higher right now. And this number will continue to climb as we add more billable insurance providers. The projected revenues were to be about 150. We're on target to reach possibly 180 for the pilot year. To build our insurance provider base, it takes 16 to 18 months.
But your collection rate is artificially low because you're comparing that against charges, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't want the people to know they're only collecting 34 cents on the dollar.
Yep.
We're collecting a lot more than that of the amount we could collect.
Yep.
Right.
So the initial startup costs for the town ambulance, they were minimal due to fire department gift account, the fire company making donations. These donations are from our very kind, generous residents. Some of the items listed below, the ambulance was purchased at a cost of $7,000. The stair chair, that was $3,600 from the gift account. The stretcher, the Wenham Fire Company donated for $1,960. And the Lucas device was $16,000 the guys raised the money for. So our ongoing costs, the cost impact to the union negotiated rate for the BLS transport worker over the first 2 months was roughly $1,748. It's projected to be $15,000 to $18,000 a year for that one sidebar letter.
Obviously, negotiations are still ongoing with the union. Their contract's up in June. We've been active with them for the past couple months with the expectation that this would likely be continuing forward. So there may be some other incremental cost increases on the personnel side that results from those negotiations.
Sure.
So other ongoing costs for AL is Intercept and the percentage we pay to the billing company. as of now, we paid about $7,000 out of pocket for the ALS intercepts and the billing. So that's just over the past year, a little less than a year, actually. So that's gonna fluctuate up and down a little bit depending upon what we're billing and how many times ALS has to come in and intercept with us.
And because we have the revenues going directly into the general fund and not in a standalone account, there's not these aren't netted out. So we actually have to budget for FY20 these expenses, even though we're gonna be receiving them on the revenue side in the general fund. But that $7,000 is an expense that has to be included in our FY20 budget in the fire expense line.
Sure.
So we project a capital expense of approximately $75,000 to $100,000 for ambulance replacement in FY21. Just a little side thing, the ambulance will be going out of service for a week on the 18th. Atlantic will be coming in, but it's going out for some minor repair to prolong its life. Atlantic ALS is responding to emergency calls through protocols already in place at the rec, and covers any additional BLS calls when we are on another call. Since the start of the pilot program, Stephen's very proud of the hard work put in by the members of the department. The firefighters have shown true dedication and professionalism, not only to the department, but to the residents. And we have surveys that actually, they have been phenomenal.
Yeah, I included a copy
Yeah,
of
it was
the
pretty-
full report.
Pretty nice, yeah.
Which of all, you look against the benchmarks, and it's all very favorable in terms of the quality of service across the board. It looks at a number of different metrics and definitely really positive feedback, not from a huge sample size, but.
From the sample size we have
Yeah,
today.
exactly, yep.
So at this time, Stephen recommends, and Danny and myself recommend, that the Wenham Fire Ambulance move forward from the pilot program. Anniversary date of March 26th to a permanent ambulance program starting on March 27th, 2019. This pilot program has proven to be beneficial to the residents of Wenham. Respectfully submitted, Stephen.
Any questions?
Just one, congratulations first. This sounds like a really amazing program, and thanks to everyone who's involved. Everything seems positive, and the guys are, the staff, I guess they're not all guys, are they all guys?
No,
No.
okay.
So the staff seems to be very, responding very well. If you took a poll of the staff, would they also be interested in, moving forward with this on a permanent basis? Is everybody on board, I guess, is what I'm trying to say?
Majority of everybody is. It's a little bit different, but I would say it's positive, yes. I mean, there's a great interaction with the residents, and the guys see the interaction, that you're not handing a patient off to somebody else after we started care and have been there and started a rapport. I think that's a huge benefit.
I do too.
Yeah, I do too.
Really, and you're helping them right through the whole stage into the hospital, and when you're getting them to a bed and you're making sure that they're comfortable.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest difference is the bed-to-bed transaction. We're taking the patient from the bed all the way to handing off at the hospital. Before you would spend 5 minutes with the patient, they would just start to gain a comfort level with you, and you'd be passing them off to a stranger. And now you're just building the rapport continually throughout the call, and you can sense the feedback is positive from the people. They very much appreciate it. It's always, geez, thank you very much.
One of the other things we've talked about on that point is, recruitment going forward,
yeah,
because that's always a challenge with the call department.
yeah.
And having this model in place, I think so far the feedback has been very positive in terms of folks being, maybe a little more interested in joining, knowing that this is, one of the elements that they're going to be involved in.
Right. So my second question has to do with the number of people responding. You said 7 typically. And it's a little lower, but we have some folks being trained. Even at 7, that seems like a reasonable number to do the
It
job.
really is. I mean,
Right, so, Are you worried
It's
about it?
not far changed from what it used to be.
No, you really, I mean, historically, it's always been a third of the department responding.
Mhm.
When we were up to 36, we had 12 responding.
I see.
We're in the 20s right now and have 3 in the intern program.
Mhm.
So our numbers will come back up. Maybe we'll get another 1 or 2 on that, but I think we have a great base and the guys are really working hard and making it work.
Mhm. Great. That's all I have.
I've already made the motion, and you seconded it. All in favor?
Did, all in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Enthusiastically.
Enthusiastically is right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great job.
And thanks for your presentation.
Town should be very proud.
Yep.
As we
Okay.
are.
As we are. So, oops, I crossed this, that was Freudian. So we're going to go back into our other book,
Back to the future.
Back to the Future, literally. The next item on our agenda, or what was now the second item in new business, is my item, and it's a discussion of potential next steps regarding process to fill the town administrator position on a short and long-term basis. I think everyone knows by now that Peter has accepted a position in Brewster as their town administrator, and is it fair to say that tendered a potential resignation? And we think at the moment will be with us until first week or so in April. And so, reluctantly, but we need to move on. And at least, I think tonight, if we can, make a couple of preliminary decisions about how we want to move forward. And I have put together just an email to the selectmen with some of those sort of touch points, decision points, that I'm hoping we can at least get to tonight, which is section C in your book. So we have several action items, I think, before us. We can define the process as we wish, but I believe we should start as soon as we can. These processes always seem to take a little longer than we wish. And the first one has to do with a shorter term and an interim town administrator, and a discussion, if there needs to be one, about do we want to have a professional town administrator serving in that office for a period of time just before Peter leaves until we find a new town administrator. So do we think that we're interested in having, identifying, interviewing, and appointing an interim town administrator?
Well, yeah, but I think that we should also consider any internal candidates for the interim position, as towns sometimes do. If people think that they want to do it and they're qualified, and we think they're qualified for an interim position, there's probably 2 or 3 that might be, and that I don't think we should exclude them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think the steps then, we haven't really defined timing yet, but it's to identify the names of some candidates, some internal, some external, and we'll have to, that we think will meet our needs, and we'll have to interview them.
I think we need to do both at the same time.
Yeah, interview them and appoint someone.
Look for an interim person as well as consider, we need to do 3 things at the same time. You're under number 1 here, I think, find out if there's any internal candidates that we'd be comfortable with and interview them, and at the same time, get external candidates who might be an interim person.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And
I
then
think that
number 2, we'd have to start on as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the interim process, the point of identifying the names of the candidates who might want to be the interim town administrator would include internal and
Okay.
external candidates that we, the board,
Yeah.
will have to interview and ultimately appoint someone
Right.
who I'm suggesting, this was actually Peter's recommendation, would start a week before Peter's departure, so there would be a 1-week overlap, and the end date we have to talk about as we see how the permanent process is going to play out. But probably 6 months, could be 6 months.
Could be.
I'm hoping that we can have these interviews and an offer sometime, I guess, mid-March.
Interviews and offer for what?
For the interim, so still talking about an interim,
Yeah, okay.
that we might be able to have someone come in, some group of people
Yeah.
come in, interview them, and
Sounds reasonable.
make an offer by mid-March. So, assuming we agree on that interim step, the next, not really necessarily next, the other portion of the process is to, of course, figure out a way to appoint a permanent town administrator. And there is a choice, we do have a choice of whether or not to do this completely internally, you know, as a process ourselves, or to choose an executive recruitment firm. It's been my observation anyway that of the town administrator searches that have happened recently, I think almost everyone uses a professional recruitment firm, but I'm interested in your opinion.
Agreed.
Okay. So again, they're not, my research, there are not a lot of them out there. If I understand this correctly, there's no particular procurement requirement, no RFP requirement, but best practice would probably be to interview 3 recruitment terms.
Yeah, so once you get
Firms?
over the $10,000 threshold, which I would expect it probably to be just over that, then you have to solicit 3.
3 bids.
Yep.
Right.
You have to interview 3, you have to solicit 3.
You have to solicit 3. You don't necessarily, as part of that process, necessarily need to bring in all 3 to interview.
Yeah.
Right.
You can,
And I think that it won't, I don't think it will be hard to identify 3. Because there are really only 3 that are
right.
very active. There are a few others, but 3 major ones that are active. So, again, that's a process that we'll have to do, identify them and then get the
Get that
bids.
going as soon as possible.
There is always the question, I think, even with an executive search committee, of whether we, the select board, want to have a search committee who would screen applicants and then recommend finalists to us, or if we just want to interview some larger number of applicants.
Well, it worked terribly the last time, so.
The standard process seems to be identify a search committee, have,
Yes.
have some outside, fair enough. You really, it's kind of fair game, Peter. You have to sit there, I'm afraid. Now you're stuck sitting there listening to this for a couple of
Yeah,
weeks.
people seem to be enthusiastic about participating in that committee. As I recall, we had far more people who were interested in serving on it than we could accommodate. And that I think the process worked well. I thought the feedback we got from the person who was in charge of the search from MRI thought it worked well as well, and that I think people felt they were involved and they could have some say over who the finalists were, and that I thought it was all positive.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the input that I've
Except for the
gotten.
result, I said.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a 50-50 thing, your chances. The
yeah.
input I have received to date would go along with that having a search committee helps us to make this process as comprehensive and as transparent and as inclusive as possible.
Transparency,
So
that's right.
we'll proceed as if we're having that. And again, I think the timeline, at least for choosing the executive search firm, should be mid-March.
And we should probably get you just got the word out, but we want to actively solicit people for this committee, right? And that,
Right. I think the way it will work is we'll hire the search firm, and then we'll see what that process is, and then solicit the
well, it
committee.
just takes time to get the letter out, get the letters of interest in. Okay, we got 30 people, how are we going to whittle it down to 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, so that,
Yeah.
Well-
The only thing I'd say is, depending on the level at which you want the screening committee to be involved with the search firm early on in the process, in terms of the ideal candidate profile and so forth, you may want to solicit those letters sooner than later.
It would require, though, I think, a little further discussion about what we would like the search committee, how we would like it to be constituted. How many people would be in it, and
Yeah.
who would we like to be represented? What groups would we like to be represented? Are these community members? Are they staff members? Are they, So we'll have to
why don't we
talk.
dust off the last time? And start there.
We could.
Well, apparently the people, we thought it worked well, and the people on the committee thought it worked well, so that if it was generally a positive experience, why not just see what we did and how we want to tinker with it, if at all?
Yeah. I have to reserve judgment a little bit on that, because as I recall, we did take a little bit of advice from the search committee that we used relative to the, what works, what options have been used, and what's been that person's experience about who's on, not who, I don't mean names, I mean what kind of a composition the search committee is. So it's
Okay.
almost parallel, but certainly people, we can say now, we need to,
Well,
we're interested in people who might be interested in a search committee. There will be one.
Right.
Right. Okay, so that's about as far as we can go tonight. I will work with Peter to make sure that internally folks know about this. I actually may ask to attend a staff meeting to talk to the staff about this, so if that's okay with you, Jack?
Yeah, yeah.
Just to let people know what's happening, and also give them an opportunity to put their name in to be a candidate for interim if they so wish. And we meet again on the 26th,
Definitely on the 26th.
right? So I'm hoping that by the 26th, we can at least have identified names,
Search firms.
search firms, and potentially names of 3, 4, however many there are, interim town administrator names, and have some sense of who we want to interview a few weeks after that.
On the search firm, on the Citizens Committee, whatever it's called, could you recirculate, at least to me, I think Catherine would want to, the material that we send out requesting people if they want letters of interest, and then whatever we communicate to that committee
Yeah.
before they get going and really interview people. So how do we set it up? How many people? Did we divide it up, as Catherine's suggestion, outside people and town employees? Did we actually make separate slots for that or not? I don't recall.
Yeah, I know for the, obviously, like the police captain screening committee, a little different. We had different demographics
Right.
of people who we wanted to be involved in that process. And I'll go back and check that if there was a charge or whatever, whatever was put
Whatever,
together.
exactly.
I'm sure
Thanks.
there's a file on that.
We can just, so next time we could have a more intelligent conversation about the committee.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think we made the decisions that we need to make tonight.
Yeah.
We will have an interim,
Yeah.
and we have a process that's not particularly fleshed out, and we will reach out and get quotes from 3 executive recruitment firms. So those are action items. Hopefully, we'll be able to update next meeting. So that's that. The next item on the agenda, potential revision to Wenham Connects Committee charge. That's letter E. And you have
Is that
that.
D?
Jack.
I-
It's
D.
D, sorry.
All right, let me read the motion.
Actually,
I have it.
I vote
the motion is not
no?
exactly what it needs to be.
Yeah, that's right. Pretty brief. I move blah, blah.
I can
Well,
help with the motion.
okay.
Or do you want me to just
Maybe
speak
give a
to this
little
brief
background, and then I think the motion may come
piece? Sure.
from the conversation.
So appointments to this new committee are on the agenda tonight. Obviously, we've received actually 8 letters of interest from residents, and then 2 staff members will be on the committee ex officio according to the charge, COA director and myself.
Who?
Council on Aging Director, Jim Reynolds, and myself. And so that puts the total number of potential people to appoint to the committee at 10. The original charge that the board approved back in January capped the number of members at 7. And so, that could certainly be amended up to increase the number to 9. I will say one of the residents who put in a letter of interest is actually a Hamilton resident, so isn't technically eligible to be appointed
Are you planning to move here, though?
to the committee as a voting member. No, just interested in the program and has been involved for the past several months. So if you increased it up to 9, that individual couldn't necessarily be appointed anyways, but be invited to participate as a, just interested party, but not necessarily be officially appointed. So I think the idea would be to amend the charge to increase the maximum amount of members to 9 from 7 currently.
Well, let's just divide these motions up. I recommend we add 2 slots to the 7 to make it a 9-member committee. All in favor of that?
I will second it.
We're doing this on the fly, it's okay.
Well, yeah, I will second it, and although I was not in favor initially of a 9-member committee,
I'm
and
not
I
in favor
still
now,
think
but I still
it's,
have to do it.
right, well, I think it's still cumbersome, and a lot of people, it's a little bit difficult to turn away interested
Yes,
interested folks, so,
but I have a caveat to that motion, and I'm suggesting if some member over the next year drops off from that, we don't feel compelled to replace that person in the committee. And it's okay if the committee membership fell to 7, as we originally envisioned the thing, without being compelled to recruit to bring it back up to 8 or 9.
well, it does, to that point, it does say up to 7, and it would say up to 9, so if it went down to 8, we'd still be in compliance with the charge.
And just also as a reminder, this
Yeah.
committee, the appointments are through next June, and the charge specifically says that there's kind of a check-in point after that initial appointment to kind of see how they're doing, how their work is progressing, whether there's some possibility of folding this into the COA board and amending the charge of that, or looking at the overlaps there if there's any need, so.
So Peter, could you tell me of the, numerically, which of the 10 people?
Number 3, Marcia.
It's number 3. Okay, good, I didn't want to say out loud.
So you've made a motion that we amend this to
And we've already
up to
approved that.
9. Did we
There's a
vote?
second. There's just a second.
Just a
There
second, yeah, I don't think we actually voted,
Did we vote?
so we can vote.
I thought I did. All in favor? Aye.
Okay,
I'm
so-
going to do the second one now.
Yeah.
This is my agenda.
Yeah, it is.
I move to appoint the following members, or people, I suppose, they're not members yet, to the Wenham Connects Committee for a term beginning February 12th, 2019, ending June 30th, 2020. Marianne T. Cannon, Albert W. Dodge, I've heard that name before. Lou Beth Kimmerly. Martha Lowry, Ann O'Shea, Patricia Tremblay, Francois Wilhelm, who's highly recommended by me,
Meet him.
Jim Reynolds, and Peter Lombardi. You won't be a long-term member of this, though.
So,
I made the motion.
yeah,
Is
so
there a second?
I will second that. I have one question about it. Do we need to, do we think, in the motion, designate the fact that the COA director and the town administrator are ex officio members?
I think it's in the charge.
So we could just appoint people, and as those positions change, new people automatically get appointed.
Yeah, I would,
Okay. And if you don't have, and it does say ex officio in the charge.
it does.
Okay, so I'm good with the motion as is.
All in favor? Aye.
Okay, so we have a Wenham Connects meeting. I actually did have a bit of a chairman's report, which I will make very briefly now, because it,
I want to go back to this. Does this committee expected to make a chairman, adopt a chairman?
Yep.
Okay.
has.
Excuse me, go ahead.
That's okay. I just, I neglected to say that, what day was that?
Last Thursday.
Last Thursday, the Lieutenant Governor, Karen Polito, was here to renew our agreement for the Community Compact. This is our second Community Compact agreement with the state. She came, there was pretty good attendance here, and a pretty good discussion about what we had done so far with our Community Compact grants and how it was used. And also, and this is what reminded me, she was very interested to hear what we were doing with the age-friendly, dementia-friendly community. So the Lieutenant Governor asked a lot of questions of Jim and Peggy. And so there was a fair amount of dialogue. Actually, most of the dialogue was around that. And we were very happy to have her here. She's genuinely interested to hear what we're doing and was pleased, actually, that we had done as much as we had and was looking forward to another 3 years of Community Compact. Senator Tarr was here, as well as Representative Hill, who, of course, said a few words. Two of the other, so from a legislative budget point of view, they brought up 2 issues, which we'll hear more about. One is education funding, and the second was completely, don't remember. Initiatives.
Climate change
Oh,
program?
yes, which again, we had a member of the staff who could speak to that a little bit. So, sorry, that's a little digression, but I did want to acknowledge that we appreciated her coming out. And we have one more set of, one more appointment.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
appointments, plural.
And that's still yours, Jack. I'm sorry, I didn't
I don't
mean to
think it's mine.
interrupt. I can't read that
Your
far.
agenda, it looks like I only have the first part.
No, you had both, all the
Yeah,
appointments.
it's hard,
do, all right,
it's hard
okay.
to see where
Extra
that
pay,
line
extra
goes.
pay, okay.
Extra pay, yeah. You get a bonus for that.
All right. Okay. We have, is there a draft motion here, too?
There is, it has a blank for the name, however.
Oh, good. I move to appoint blank. Okay. And, we have, because of a resignation of Christopher Vance, we now have we have 3 full-time zoning board of appeal members and 2 associate members. We could have 3, but we have 2, right?
Correct.
So Chris Vance was a permanent member and is resigned. And we have 2 associate members, Dana Bagan and Evan Campbell, who are both submitted letters of interest to be permanent members of the committee. And there we are.
Well, I could share a little bit of information on that if it will help the
Yeah.
discussion move along. The zoning board didn't have a long discussion about this, but I happened to attend their meeting last week and asked if both associates were interested, and did get the information that Evan is the more senior of the 2 by probably a year. And I've had some conversation with each of them, but I think I would put Evan's name on that list if it were me.
Speak up.
Well, I don't want to make your motion for you, but
No, listen,
I
it's
think,
blank, so that, by the way, did you look at, or did you ask about attendance? Did both of these had roughly the same level of attendance for the past year and a half on the committee?
I did not look at that.
Because if one of them hasn't showed up in the past year and the other one has, that would influence me. And but we probably don't know that off.
Well, I think one person, yes, one person's only been on the associate for half a year, but
Yeah.
nonetheless has been in town for longer.
Right.
And the other one has been in town for a while as well.
And I think in the past, though, we have tended to appoint the most senior of the associates, like your next up thing. So I would agree with that.
Okay. So it's a motion to appoint Evan Campbell.
I move we appoint Evan Campbell as a full member of the Zoning Board of Appeals for a term beginning February 12th and ending June
Today?
30th.
Okay. I would
Or
second
we can
that.
move it up to Valentine's Day. But, you know.
I would second that motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations.
And I guess that means that we now should be, we have a lot of appointments that we're going to need to be talking about, but we need to add to that list an associate, because now we only have one or 2 associate members of the ZBA.
Part of the value of having
I was
associate members.
just going to say,
Yeah.
big value, because all 3 of them that are left, 1, 2, 3 of them, have been attending all the meetings. So it's kind of seamless. Either one of them could continue.
Well, I recall 3 years ago, we had a messy situation in town, which I won't further describe, but it was complicated by the fact that one of the 3 permanent members managed to miss one meeting. And well, this person was then, and the person had to, within a certain period of time, review the tapes and get him or herself, I'm not up to speed. The person admitted he did not do that, and so had we not had an associate member in the bullpen who had actually attended all of these meetings, which we could then put in place, not necessarily promote, but put in place for that particular decision, which indeed is what happened. So having an associate is critical to the smooth functioning of the ZBA, particularly since they have these rules like that. You miss one meeting, forget it, unless you can prove that you've caught up. You cannot further participate, and there are some rules that you need all 3 members to vote on something. You can't be just 2 members. Right. So, unlike you and I are doing these votes tonight. So I think the importance of the associate is very, very high.
And I think there's an expectation that the associate member attends every meeting.
Yeah.
And as
which
far
is
as I can see, they
why
do,
I just
which
described.
is just for that reason, and they know that that's an expectation. So they can continue functioning.
Do you remember that scenario? Do you remember that?
I do. How could you forget? I
couldn't forget because I was on the...
remember the name of the law that was invoked. Okay, so that was item E under new business. The next item, we have the first of what I think will be several updates over the months, whoever knows how long. And this is an update on the Maplewood Senior Affordable Housing Project. We did have special counsel in this evening in our executive session. There are a few things that we talked about that we can report on in open session, and a few additional things that we need to at least get updates on. Keep me honest, but my recollection is that we heard that the settlement agreement, or the discussions around the settlement agreement are proceeding. We know that there's been a term sheet approved by both parties, the plaintiffs and the developer. We do know that the lawyers are talking about the next step, which is to sort of flesh out the term sheet into an actual settlement agreement. No timeline yet, just know that it's in process, but that's good, the fact that it's in process. We have determined that it would be in the best interest, the Board of Selectmen has determined it would be in the best interest of the town to get our own, for a variety of reasons, our own private appraisal of this property. So we have engaged a firm to appraise the proposed property, and we'll use that. That appraisal should be back to us by the end of February. So that will help us inform decisions, comments, concerns moving forward to town meeting.
Let's go back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for the listening audience, the proposal is to purchase the property for $1.8 million. And there's not a purchase and sale, but an option to buy it, extends for 7 years. But so since this is going to involve town money and state money and public money, we want to make sure that the proposed purchase price is reasonable, and that's why we've engaged the appraiser. And again, to appraise, is it really worth $1.8 million? Whether it's the highest and best use, or for affordable housing, or even for any type of a 40B. So we're very interested in being able to report back to the town that yes, indeed it is, or it isn't, or something in between.
And although it's not completely clear how this timing will play out, another reason for that appraisal is that this land that's being proposed is in chapter land right now, and could, will go through a right of first refusal process at some point in time. So knowing the value of that land is important for a lot of reasons. The last 2 items I'm going to ask for Peter's help with. The first one has to do with funding. We know that there's an application before the CPC for $750,000 to fund what I believe is the acquisition of the property. And I think that you can share with us some information about fund balances, assuming, in general, for the CPC.
Yeah, so
At 750,
obviously this will be
yeah.
discussed in more detail at the CPC meeting tomorrow night, but based on the current applications, current fund balances in each of the various accounts, anticipated revenues collected from the 3% surcharge on the town side, and then a conservative state match for FY20. If all of the applications are funded at the amount that they have been requested, and obviously this is all subject to deliberation and an ultimate recommendation from the CPC, but the draft kind of sources and uses document updated as of late this afternoon. According to all those parameters, the fund balance, so think of it like the CPA general fund, would have a balance at the end of the year of just over $98,000. The open space and recreation fund would have a balance of just over $677,000, and all of the other remaining accounts, so historic preservation, community housing, and the budgetary reserve, which is a category that we have funded in prior years, not by statute, but by policy, would all have zero balances. So the total reserve balance of those two accounts would be just over $775,000, an overwhelming majority of which would be specifically in that open space and recreation fund. And again, just to review very high level the applications that have been submitted this year to the CPC, community house under the umbrella of historic preservation, $98,000 request. Habitat for Humanity, the 40 Hull Street project, community housing, $60,000. Harbor Light for the Maple Woods project, $750,000. Town hall debt, historic preservation, that's the annual debt payment, $126,100. A townwide trail map, this is a open space and recreation committee application for $6,000, and then another small application from the Open Space and Rec Committee for the bench at Wenham Lake on Cedar Street for $1,200. So total funding requests this year, just over $1 million, $1,041,300. And again, premised on all of those being fully supported in terms of the funding amounts that those various projects have requested. Those are the fund balances at the end of those. That would be what is remaining if they were all to be approved, recommended and approved by town meeting.
So, a question about that.
Yep.
So, since we're talking about a Maple Woods update, more for the public's edification here. So there is money in 3 categories for Harbor Light. CPA fund balance, if I'm reading this correctly, community housing, and budgetary reserve. All have portions of what I believe is a $750,000 request.
Correct. It's from those 3 different buckets.
And I guess it's not completely clear to me the difference between the fund balance and the budgetary reserve.
So fund balance is the carryover from prior years. The budgetary reserve is a designation that we've used historically to allocate the balance remaining after all of the various projects have been funded at their minimum 10% amounts, or each of the categories have been funded and all the projects have been funded, to basically hold those revenues available for another purpose if one were to come up at some point after town meeting and before the close of the fiscal year, if we need to call a special town meeting, so we could access those funds from those reserves. But again, that's not a statutory requirement. That's just something that we have done historically as a matter of policy.
Okay. Okay. Do you have questions on that?
No, but
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
have
go
a-
to part two.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't
So
have any-
part two of that is that we understand that there is the expectation of a proposal to recommend, for the CPC to recommend funding beyond the requested application. Funding at $1 million rather than $750,000. And I'm interested to hear, we're interested to hear what that does to the fund balances.
Yeah, so obviously the term sheet that the private parties have agreed to and that the settlement agreement is likely to follow sets a standard of a minimum of $1 million in town funding for the project to be able to move forward at the 45 units that have been proposed. In Harbor Light's application to the CPA, or CPC, excuse me, requesting $750,000 in CPA funds, they've said that they intend to request another $600,000 in Affordable Housing Trust money, but obviously that $1 million is the benchmark at which they'd be meeting the terms of the potential settlement agreement. So to get to $1 million in Harbor Light funding, based on the current fund balances and revenues that are projected coming in, the CPC could, if it so chose, not fund the community house project, not fund the Habitat for Humanity project on 40 Hull Street, and essentially zero out the fund balance and just barely get to that $1 million. So it would be $1,006,000 is really total that would be available if those two projects were not funded at all by the CPC for this coming year. And the only one of the 4, 5 accounts that would have any balance left, if that were the case, would be the open space fund, which would have that $677,000, because those can only be used for that purpose, those funds.
So any other requests, I think, except, I think I understand that there would be funds available for the town hall debt.
Town hall debt, so town hall debt could be funded, the trail map, and the Cedar Street bench and Maple Woods. Those 4 projects would be funded. The 2 that wouldn't be would be Community House and Habitat for Humanity.
But the following year, we basically would not be able to take, the CPC would not be able to recommend funding for anything other than open space.
Sure they would, they'll have more revenue.
So there'd be revenues coming in for next year on the order of $400,000 or thereabouts, being conservative in terms of the state match. If you take the town hall debt off the top, there would be approximately $270,000 available. Then you'd have to take the 10% off the top for each of the 3 categories. So there'd be something on the order of just under $200,000 available for projects after the town hall debt next year, based on the revenues that would be coming in.
Comments, Jack?
You wanna go part 3?
Oh, okay. Well, there is a part 3, but comments on the CPC part of
I
this?
don't like to see it drain down, and that they have the money to make $750. That was a request. I think they should consider the $750 and not anymore. Let the Affordable Housing Trust, which has plenty of money, fund the other portion. Whether it's only $250,000 or more, it's up to the Affordable Housing Trust. I think that's what people expect us and to do. I was referring to the timing issue.
Yeah,
In terms of
that's- so
protection for the
that's-
town. I mean, the people.
Yeah, no, go right ahead.
The preamble is that it's extremely important to fund Harbor Light's Maple Woods project, because once we do that, we're over the top in terms of 10% and we're home free. We're not home free at all. And so we learned that tonight. and that either Peter or you can go through the details of that.
I'll ask Peter to
Yeah,
do that,
sure.
since he's got the
So this is a question that I had
late-breaking
put out to
information.
special counsel so that everyone was clear in terms of what protections it afforded. I know that has always clearly been a high priority for the town. It was one of the reasons why the Affordable Housing Trust was created in the first place. And having, given that we're actually relatively close to meeting our 10% SHI number and therefore being protected against unfriendly 40Bs, that's a big value to why there would be support for this project. So the feedback that we got from special counsel and affirmation from Mr. DeFranza from Harbor Light, who I connected with this afternoon, is that once the comprehensive permit, if the project does move forward and the settlement agreement is squared away, funding is secured, the matter is remanded back to the ZBA. The ZBA approves the amended project at 45 units and so forth, and issues a comprehensive permit. From the day that comprehensive permit is issued, the town has protections for 1 year until a building permit has to be pulled. And then, assuming a building permit is pulled at the 1 year mark, that protection stays in place. That was part of the reason why our protection dropped off the last time, was because it went into appeal. You couldn't pull a building permit, so after a year, that protection went away. So pull the building permit after 1 year of issuance of the comp permit. From that point on, that starts the clock for another 18 months. 18 months after the building permit has been pulled, occupancy certificate needs to be secured in order to maintain those units being counted on our SHI. So essentially, what the project would secure would be a maximum 2.5 year protection against unfriendly 40Bs.
As I recall, Andrew Francis' presentation to the CPC, was it last week or the week before? Which we all attended, and Catherine and I attended anyway, so did John, that he was asked by, I think it was Tony Fahey, chairman of the ZBA, what would be the timing of when these units would become available, operational. And Mr. DeFrancis' response is shovel in the ground 4 to 5 years. And that, which means that they wouldn't be able to secure an occupancy permit for another, call it a year to a year and a half. So there's going to be if this project goes forward as envisioned, it seems highly unlikely that we would have 40B protection, and there would be a gap of anywhere from 3 to 4 and possibly longer where an unfriendly 40B could come through, even if we do all of this and get in there and immediately get the rights to go ahead and do an unfriendly or friendly 40B and have the process starts all over again. So I'm just, the word I hear from outside people is, oh, well, this will take care of it. Not necessarily. So that, watch out.
Right. And to clarify, the Affordable Housing Trust has come up a couple of times in this conversation, although the application, the CPC application, does allude to the fact that there could be a request. There has not yet, the Affordable Housing Trust has not received any application for this project. And maybe a very important, given this 20-month plus issue with protection, the plan that was recently produced by the Affordable Housing Trust may be very important, because that plan allows for us to reach 10% in 5 years of affordable housing in other ways. So I think it's important that we will continue to work on that plan, and if and when an application comes, the Affordable Housing Trust and then the selectmen will react to it, but the trust has not received anything, and I did confirm that with the chair, because.
And the CPC votes meets tomorrow night here at 7 o'clock. It'll be televised, and so anybody interested in this, if they don't want to attend in person, they can certainly tune into the TV like they're doing right now.
Yeah, all those people out there that are watching. Okay. It is concerning to me to think that in a time when we have more potential than ever to have historical preservation, to have open space projects with our open space committee, to have affordable housing projects in addition to Maple Woods, it is concerning to me that we would. See, 3 cups, you notice?
He's leaving, so.
I know. I think you could give him a little water, but we're really cutting down. John wasn't here. He didn't even get a cup. See that?
That's right.
It's like they knew what we'd do. Anyone thinks, we're going to talk about the budget in a little while. If anyone thinks we're overspending, 3 people, 3 cups. It is a little bit concerning that we rely on, the town relies appropriately, I think, on the CPC to be able to fund some of the things that would otherwise either not happen or come out of town money. So
We'll see.
we'll see. So that's our update on affordable housing, or on Maple Woods. Next on our agenda, I wish I could read this agenda, we have a review and potential approval of the Community Preservation Act grant agreement and historic preservation restriction agreement with the Wenham Museum. And is this when we move to our new book? Our second book, yes. Sorry?
You have a different color than I do.
Oh.
Yours is white.
Yours is cooler, what can I say? This, G is new, in new business, is in our second book, and I will, I'll make the motion, and then we'll see where we want to go with that, and we'll talk about what we're actually talking about. The motion is, I move to approve the proposed Community Preservation Act grant agreement and historic preservation restriction agreement between the town of Wenham and the Wenham Historical Association, Inc., which is the Wenham Museum. Is there a second?
Second.
By way of discussion, Peter, you want to give us the
Abbreviated.
the high level
Sure.
where we are?
Yeah, so the Wenham Museum applied for CPA funding last year, just about a year ago now, just over a year ago, for a number of different renovations to the building. I believe their initial ask was closer to $107,000. Ultimately, the number that the CPC supported and town meeting ultimately approved was $89,455 for this work. As part of that motion, they authorized the Board of Selectmen to enter into a grant agreement and historic preservation restriction on the property. And since that time, both parties have been engaged in some discussions and negotiations that the net result of which are the grant agreements and preservation restriction agreement that are before the board tonight. Do you want to add anything else?
Okay. And for Catherine's purposes, because I know she's going to ask this, as we approve this, I hope, we need to be able to refer, the motion just says the proposed Community Preservation Act grant agreement, but there's nothing really identifying. I mean, there have been a couple of iterations, so can we identify it by putting a date on it, or it hasn't been signed yet, either by us or by the Wenham Museum.
Yep.
But for the purposes of the minutes, how would we identify the agreement?
Normally, what we say in most of our motions is as proposed or as contained in the packet.
So whatever is in this packet tonight is what, okay.
Ultimately is being voted on and approved.
Okay, so further discussion on that? Nope, I have no further either. We take a vote, all in favor?
Yeah.
Oh, do we have the further discussion?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
I want to comment.
Yeah.
No further discussion.
Okay,
I want to
sure.
comment that, on full disclosure, I'm a member of the Wenham Museum Board. However, I never attended any meetings where this subject was discussed or deliberated or voted on, nor any subcommittee of the board, nor have I participated in any negotiation other than amongst my colleagues here. So otherwise, I'm in favor. I just
And
voted
you
yes.
have disclosed that actually legally.
I signed
and with
a
the
legal
town.
document and passed it around to my colleagues on the board that Peter gave me to read and sign and so forth.
Okay, so,
Harriet wants to say something.
Could you just tell us the terms? Because I think it will be helpful in view of the First Church and all, and so forth.
well, there's a.
4 years. It's 4 years.
It's a,
29.
I want
it's a
to see if I can get a blood pressure up.
It's a 40-page document. I think there are a lot of terms in here, in addition to the preservation.
Yes, but the
See.
major bone of contention with CPC was a term of 20 years when, and now it's been negotiated to 29 years, and the reason for that the justification, which came from the coalition in Boston, is that at under 30 years, you do not have to have it all approved by Mass
It's
Historical.
29 years, Harriet. It's 29.
That's what I said.
Yeah. You asked what's in there. I said it's 29.
I know it's it, I know, I saw it.
What was your question?
No, you actually are asking the question, and
No, I'm not asking the question, I'm
Well, how-
asking you all to say,
How would you know?
I just read it in your packet,
Okay,
okay?
yeah,
To say that it's 29
It's
years.
29
it's
years.
29 years.
And the reason for that odd number
we heard
is
you.
because it means you don't have to go
Yes,
to Mass
we
Historical.
heard you.
Which is a very useful,
Okay,
shall we say, it's a very good thing to avoid for a relatively small amount of money.
okay. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. The next item on the agenda, I think that this evening, we're going to discuss part of it and postpone part of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that a fair statement?
Yep.
So what we're going to discuss, and this is Jack's agenda item, is a review of regional dispatch feasibility study, review of draft intermunicipal agreement for North Shore 911 Center, and discussion of potential next steps.
Were we going to postpone that? What am I supposed to discuss then?
so I can give an update on the IMA that we've been working on with State 911, the feasibility study that MRI is working on relative to looking at either opting to partner with Hamilton or Danvers will likely be on the February 26th agenda.
Right, so that's the part. So we're talking about the IMA tonight.
Just the IMA, yeah. So we last talked about this in November, actually early December, after the first iteration of the draft IMA was sent to the member communities by State 911, who is still planning to assume management of the Regional Dispatch Center up in Middleton this coming July 1. Talking to the chiefs, and based on my own involvement in serving on the advisory board over the past 3.5+ years, we had put together a letter back to State 911. They had solicited feedback from the member communities, and so we provided a letter back to them expressing our concerns about a number of different elements of the IMA as originally drafted. At least 2 of the other member communities sent along similar concerns to State 911, and they then spent the better part of another month and a half revising the IMA, talking internally, and presented us with a new iteration a few weeks ago now at this point, and we had a board meeting, talked through it all together, gave some additional feedback. But I guess bottom line, big picture, they made pretty significant amendments to the IMA. They really listened to the feedback that we provided and that the other member communities provided about the purely advisory capacity that they had kind of initially slotted the member communities in terms of our involvement in operations and oversight. And so I think that was definitely a major improvement. Their initial withdrawal term was 7 years, and you had to give, it was 3 years notice, so you basically locked in for a better part of a decade. They amended that down to 5 years, which is the same as the first iteration of this regional dispatch center with a 2-year notice provision, so much more reasonable there. They explicitly said that they own all of the capital infrastructure and they will be responsible for any upgrades related to, system failure, system issues, maintenance, so forth. It's all of it. Obviously, their commitment to fully fund the operations and leave the town with no required financial contribution has remained. So again, $80,000+ a year off the top that we're saving for FY20 and beyond. And they, I think most importantly, added in language that allows the member communities to opt out within the first 2 years, as long as you give a year notice. So I think for our purposes, where we knew that we weren't going to be able to go live with Hamilton or Danvers, even if it looked like that was the way to go, come July 1. If we didn't have that opt-out provision, we frankly wouldn't have had any choice. So they have added that language in there. I don't expect that to change. So it really allows us, once we have that feasibility study, to then spend some real time and decide on how things are going up in Middleton once the state takes it over, what our experience is, if it's new or different, how we're feeling about it, and then what it might look like, how feasible it would be to look at the other two options on the table. So it gives the town some ability to not be necessarily constrained to a really strict timeline where we have to make a decision without being fully informed, and to see how things are going once the state takes over in July. So I think that's probably the best news of the new iteration of the IMA. As I mentioned, we met a couple weeks ago. There was some additional input, particularly on the public safety side around shared frequencies. So right now we're waiting for the probably last and final version of the IMA from State 911. Once we have that, the member communities basically said that they needed a minimum of 30 days to get local approvals. And again, with the Municipal Modernization Act, we don't have to go to town meeting to approve IMAs. It's just an IMA like anything else. So it would just be a Board of Selectmen approval. And that's, most likely, barring something significantly unforeseen, the direction that we're going to be going, knowing that we have some ability to opt out in the next year or two if we're so inclined.
So I'm not exactly sure what caused them to change their focus and actually take the input of this advisory committee seriously, but whatever it was, I'm glad that it happened.
I think a room full of managers and police and fire chiefs, all saying the same thing, singing the same chorus, and knowing, they ultimately, part of the reason why they're willing to fully fund the operation is they've spent a lot of money, and they want to see the program succeed. And so I think they took the feedback that we gave them and said, it wasn't worth the potential, political implications if they weren't listening to us. They don't want to lose any of the member communities. They want to solidify what's there and grow on it and expand it going forward. And I think their response is indicative of that intent.
So my big takeaway, at least I think, my couple of takeaways from this is that free is actually free, according to this IMA. That member towns, through their managers and public safety folks, will have a lot more say, real meat and say of how things operate and how money is spent moving forward. And so those two things are great. And we'll have a little bit of time. So the money part is great, but what we don't know yet is the service aspect when it changes management. And this is going to give us a little time to assess the service situation and whether we're satisfied with the service, in addition to the fact that it's obviously cost-effective.
And everything they've represented to us is that the existing management structure that they have in place now, that's been in place for a little over a year, would
Yeah.
remain.
Okay.
It would just be that the sheriff's department wouldn't be kind of the umbrella overseeing those operations. It would instead be State 911, and the sheriff would simply be a landlord leasing the facility out under that arrangement. And so, I think that they have some good folks in place now managing the operations that are doing a good job of managing all the interests of the various stakeholders and have made some good progress. If you remember, MRI did that very comprehensive audit a year ago this month, and at our most recent meeting, they ticked off, of all of those dozens of recommendations, the progress that they've made, and it's been pretty significant. So certainly moving in the right direction from where we were a year ago, and recognizing that they need to change and showing willingness to change in order to be up to the standard that we need.
And you think that commitment will continue? The commitment to meeting the audit?
Yeah, I'll say the one thing that's a complicating factor for Wenham in particular, where we came in, we were the only community that was part of another PSAP, another regional dispatch center, and so we went without any infrastructure. And so Sheriff's Department, State 911 funded building our infrastructure out at the time. And there's been some back and forth relative to who owns that infrastructure over the past several years. And so that's the one piece that's outstanding that I have a question in to the Executive Director of State 911 and EOPS Undersecretary and so forth, relative to the new IMA, is they, over the past year or two, have said, oh no, you got that with State 911 grant funding, that's yours. You own it. If it breaks, you fix it. If you're responsible for maintaining it, and we have been doing that. And now they're saying, which big picture is great, we own it, we'll replace it. But in the same sense, what it means for us is if we were ever to consider opting out, that we would then have to cover the costs of replacing that infrastructure with new equipment. And so we're in the process. That's really the last piece to close out in the feasibility study, is understanding what those cost implications, one-time capital cost implications would be if we were going to make that transition.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's a big improvement over what we saw last time, so thank you for you and the other managers and administrators' efforts to get something that's reasonable. So you'll be back with another, hopefully last
Part two.
version, and we'll also at our next meeting, or hopefully next meeting, talk about the
Yep.
feasibility study.
But despite this agreement, remember the golden rule. He was the gold, makes the rules.
Yeah, right, well.
And that's ultimately what the
That's-
IMA
is
says.
true.
I mean,
Yeah.
they allow for more of a voice from the member communities, but ultimately they say, when it comes down to it, it's got to work within our program, our budget, our policies, and we have the final say. And
It's not unreasonable.
No, it's not.
It's a risk, but it's not totally unreasonable.
And it's free.
And it seems to be free. I was interested to hear about the capital. Well, I'll wait to see the final one before I'm completely convinced. Okay, so I'm going to make a recommendation. We're ready to go on to old business. The first thing on this agenda right now in old business is an FY20 budget update, and then a review of warrant articles.
Yep.
But I see that we have some members who have been patiently sitting here from the Historic Commission. And I'm guessing that they're here to talk about the general bylaw amendment regarding the Historic District Commission. So it's okay with everybody? Let's take that first, so
We have,
they can go out and plow.
thank
Yeah,
you
really.
for
Thank you.
moving me along.
No
I
worries, thank you
appreciate
for
it
coming,
tonight.
all of you.
We have two issues here.
Find it.
One is that through some sort of administrative error, osmosis,
we have a historic district and we have a historic commission. The historic district controls everything, or is responsible for everything from the North Beverly line, the Hamilton line. And that's what we've been doing. We also have a historic commission, which is responsible for, what are we responsible for?
Preservation outside the district.
Preservation outside the district. Homes that are first period houses that are threatened, or other things of interest. And we did a survey, an extensive survey of everything outside of not the historic district itself, but everything outside the district. So that's one bylaw amendment we're asking you to put on the warrant and support. The other one is we have no enforcement authority. And we've had, I wouldn't say violators, but we've had some issues this year with homeowners, new homeowners who, people move into the district and they found out after the closing that they're now subject to historic district rules. And we have sent a letter, haven't we, Jackie, to all the real estate agents who sell homes on Main Street?
Not the first thing that they... I'm sure that's not the first thing that they run with. Oh, by the way, there are rules if you buy this
I'm
house.
sure it is, except for Mary Wood. I'm sure she does it all the time.
I'm sure she does.
So that's it. We're asking that through the building inspector, if we find a serious violation, and of course, the selectmen would always be the right of appeal, that we'd be allowed to fine someone $100 a day until they comply. Salem has $300 a day. Other communities have less. Salem is probably the most prohibitive. But we thought $100 a day would be significant enough to make people pay attention to what needs to be done. And we got big issues coming. We got solar that we're going to have to deal with. State's going to push that. And we got some open land on Main Street that's going to be subject to some kind of change. So we're asking you to put that on the warrant and support it, please.
So that, just so that I'm clear on the second one, if you've made a ruling that a homeowner needs to do something in order to comply, and they don't, it gets reported, my question will be who will report it, but it would get reported to the building inspector, who would have the authority to go out and look and inspect it and say, indeed, they're not in compliance, and
he would authorize the fine.
And like any other, even a zoning enforcement issue, probably it would be, it's a little less clear who would actually bring the complaint forward in this
We would
case.
bring the complaint forward to the building inspector.
Okay, so you'd see it because you're involved with it. And,
correct.
okay.
Wait, just 1 second. Correct?
Correct. But I do want to clarify that it's not $100 a day. The fine schedule reflects the same fine schedule in our already approved non-criminal disposition. This would not fall under non-criminal disposition, but it reflects the same fine structure as non-criminal disposition, which is in your packet.
Whatever the building inspector's doing
Warning
now.
for the first offense, $25 for the second offense, $50 for the third, and $100 for fourth and each subsequent violation.
So fourth, that would be interpreted to be the fourth day if there was a warning the first day, something the second day. Okay. And if just to be clear, the first part of that, right now, the historic district commission and the, what is the other, historical commission are the same people.
Same people, but different function, different responsibilities.
Need to be separated in the bylaws.
Needs
so
to
that
be.
it's clear.
It was separated at one time. Somehow it.
They
They got conflated somewhere along the
So
way.
it's just really, but it is the same people. We just need to make it clear that you have responsibility for both
Correct.
the district. Okay, I get it. I think we have to talk about all of these more. I think right now we're just trying to understand. I'm trying to understand what they are. It seems reasonable to me. We have a lot of bylaw amendments on this town meeting, so.
None as worthy as this.
Do you know, everyone who comes in and stands there says the same thing.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, oh, sure, please.
Dana, in your presentation, you said that, of course, the homeowner has an ability to appeal to the Board of Selectmen if they disagree with the Historic District Commission. Is that memorialized in these bylaw amendments?
No, it is not.
Does it
Well,
exist
we
anywhere?
got to set up an appeal process. Go ahead.
I can clarify.
Yeah.
So, with the historic district, when someone does appeal,
Don't get away from the microphone.
I know, I just want people to hear it for when Catherine goes back to listen to it, or for anyone who's out there. So the historic district is in a unique circumstance. It's not like when the building inspector makes a determination about the zoning bylaw, and it very clearly goes to the zoning board of appeals. Right now, if the Historic District Commission and a homeowner in the district get in a disagreement, the way the Chapter 40C is written in Mass General Law, that goes to Superior Court very quickly. There's no provision, there's no local option for, trying to get together and get sorted on something. So this provides a local option where the building inspector says, stop what you're doing. Please don't continue. If you continue, we're going to fine you. But there are provisions built into it to go back to the Historic District Commission to potentially amend a certificate of appropriateness, or for the commission to say, no, this stands. And from there, if they continue doing the work or they want to appeal, it goes into that Superior Court process. So
Not the
That seems pretty
No.
onerous.
No appeal.
And so so there really is no appeal process. If you have to go to Superior Court if you disagree with the Historic District, that's pretty
and that's
pretty
what
onerous.
it currently is now, is that anything that happens, either there's no enforcement capacity at all, or they have to go to that Superior Court level. So I think it's trying to find the middle ground, and maybe we need to, that's the feedback that we need to go back and take a look at, is providing a better local appeal process to these fines.
Yes,
Whether
yes.
it's the selectmen or.
Everything should be appealable.
Which
Okay.
was part of the discussion, if we rewind a couple of years ago,
been a
with
couple
the
of years
proposed demolition delay bylaw.
Right.
That was part of the feedback then, was that we should try to keep the appeal process local.
Right.
As much as possible, as long as possible.
Right.
So that we don't make it overly onerous on the residents, on the homeowners, if there was an issue that were to arise where there was a difference of opinion.
And this commission, let me just say that this commission is homeowner sensitive, homeowner friendly. And so we bend over backwards before we get to any kind of situation that we're discussing here.
But future commissioners, if that's what you call them, might not be as homeowner-friendly as you. So we need
That's
some
right.
protection for the homeowners in there, that if they disagree with you, that there's
And
something.
that's especially true now. You don't have, you have a new generation of people who don't, whenever the schools stopped teaching civics, they have really a different perspective in all this. And if we want to preserve this, I think.
Well, we do, just
Yeah.
nevertheless, reasonable people sometimes disagree, and we don't have to we don't want to end up in court or in the Chronicle,
But there's nothing in
that you go to
this,
court.
this bylaw amendment that speaks to the local appeal.
Yeah, I think that's something we may want to
Okay.
add.
Jackie will address that.
Seems like a good idea, right?
That's good. That's I brought it up.
To your point? Yeah, okay.
Well, you can't have the nuclear option right away. No, that's
Yeah, no, and, despite your best efforts, there will be times when they can't reach an agreement, and it is onerous. And as selectmen, hopefully, we have a better context in which to work with all parties to resolve the problem than Superior Court does. And I
Because you're
assume-
appointed and we're elected, see, we're
Well,
very sensitive
yeah,
to that.
right. So, and I assume statutorily, that's allowable, or you'll find that out.
We'll find out.
Yeah. I don't know if we could
We will
take
find
on,
out.
yeah, okay, great. I think we get it. Anything else?
Thank you very much for your
Thank you for
time.
coming, thank you.
Yep. Stay safe.
Okay, so, Peter, do you prefer to go back to the budget or to continue on with the bylaws?
Well, no,
What?
the bylaws another night. We'll be here till midnight.
Well, so we're talking about closing the warrant at your next meeting.
Yeah.
And so if we haven't had an initial discussion about these bylaws, I'm concerned that there's not going to be a ability to amend them.
Well, John's missing tonight. The bylaws are pretty important. Can we schedule another meeting between then and now? Now and then?
A meeting next week.
Be next week.
Well,
Even if we were to have reviewed all of the bylaws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that are on the agenda tonight, will that mean that we will have had a preliminary review of every bylaw that's on the warrant? So these are the last 5?
Well, there's 4, well, one we talked about.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 4, but a number of them are the final iteration of the zoning bylaw amendments. So really, we could skip that piece tonight and just talk about the other 3. To be honest, they're very straightforward.
okay.
They
Oh,
can be, they can be explained in a very straightforward manner.
Exactly, which is,
Having
I
sat
think,
through a couple of those meetings, they're not always,
no, not the zoning
straight-
bylaw.
oh,
Skipping
yeah,
the zoning
okay,
bylaw.
okay.
No,
Yeah,
not, nope, because
Right.
we've already, there is nothing new in what ultimately was reviewed and recommended by the planning board relative to the zoning bylaws in terms of conceptually.
right, that's true.
Some of the
Just
level
small
of detail,
things,
certainly
yeah.
things have
Okay.
changed, but
So that leaves 3.
yes, so.
Maybe we can get through.
Yeah, okay.
One is really,
So I'm going to just start from the bottom and work my way up. So I'll talk about the reduction number of Conservation Commission members from 7 to 5. It's allowable under the statute. There are currently 6 members on the Conservation Commission, one of whom you can see in your packet hasn't attended in over a year. And the Conservation Commission itself, for the purposes of really making quorum, have requested this change from 7 members down to 5. It needs town meeting approval. And the net effect would be that the member who hasn't attended in a year plus, has been having health issues, would not be reappointed, up for reappointment this year. And all of the remaining members who are actively involved in serving on the commission would remain. But there are 3 members whose terms expire this year. And one of those members, instead of having a 3-year renewal, would go to a 2-year, so that way the cycle of the expiration of terms of the 5 remaining members would be 2 1 year, 2 another year, and 1 the 3rd year, as opposed to 3 1 1, which is what it would be now.
I'm certainly in favor of that. But when you mentioned somebody hasn't attended here, even though health issues, I recall when I was on the Finance Committee for many, many years, that if you missed, I think it was 3,
that was 3?
it's 3 meetings, you're off.
Yeah, it was vacated.
That's in our bylaws. That's specifically for Finance Committee members. We explored adding some kind of language to that effect for all boards and committees last
Yes,
year.
that's where I was going.
And ultimately, what town council said is there are a number of multi-member adjudicatory boards, land use in particular, where we would be prohibited from putting that kind of restriction on them by statute or by regulatory authority. So we simply couldn't, for Conservation Commission in particular, I know that town council has said we couldn't actually put in the same conditions that we have for Finance Committee.
Okay.
Because that was our part of the initial discussion, is whether we could just do it across the board. It works for Finance Committee, it's fair, you're appointed to this board or committee, the expectation is that you're there. If you're not, then there's quorum issues for the other members who are participating and so forth. But
Yeah, I think the FinCom admonition is that unless you're sick, so if you were sick, you were excused. But it wasn't 3 and you're out, it was 3 and you're out unless you're sick,
Yeah.
by the way. So this person would have been excused had we been able to put that bylaw in, because you just said he's not feeling well, or he's ill. Anyway, okay.
So I have to say, in general, conceptually, I'm not in favor of reducing the size of a board to meet the sort of convenience of having a quorum. I think you reduce the representation, especially in something as important as the Concom. I get the practicality of not being able to have a meeting because you don't have quorum, but when I look at this particular case, and I also get the issues of, it's hard to recruit people, but I'm going to reserve judgment a little bit on that one. When I look at this particular case and this particular board, I think there have been some aberrations, I'll call them, that could be resolved and allow us to continue to have a 7-member board. For instance, someone who's been sick for a year. You know, how likely is that really to happen again? So are we going to make a change, a permanent change, because one member who, you know, is elderly, et cetera, probably at higher risk for being ill, is ill? I'm not necessarily convinced. I think we had another member, I was going to say pass away, but is that the Concom?
Another member move out of town. I think one of the issues that we found, particularly with Conservation Commission, is
Oh, right.
we have some highly qualified members, but this is also their profession. And so there are a fair amount of situations where an application comes before the commission and they have to recuse themselves because they work in a consulting role for somebody who's involved in that particular project. And so that's another issue that has caused quorum issues with the Conservation Commission on and off over the past several years.
So doesn't more members, if 2 people routinely have to recuse themselves, doesn't having more members allow there to be more people who can vote?
Yeah, it would just be, it's just one member.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So anyway, that's just my preliminary input on that one. But I
Well, no,
understand
If
it.
you recuse yourself, and let's say there's 7 members,
Yep.
and 2 people recuse themselves, don't they still have to get 4 members? 4 voting members?
There,
That's what
yes,
it
you
is.
have to have 4, in a majority has to be 4.
So, I mean, the recusing, people who have to recuse themselves exacerbates this situation. Because they're more likely to show up and not be able to vote, which is the same thing as not showing up.
But if there were, well, yes, I guess, if there were 5 members and 3 of them, or 2 of them recuse themselves, they would need 3 votes, and so you're saying there would still be, there would be 3 people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
I hear
just
you.
you did the numbers for me, thank you.
Yeah. I see that point.
Okay.
Not sure I still.
Oh, I didn't think I could change your mind at all, I just want to go through the
No,
numbers with you.
no, and I understand, so thank you. Okay, you're going up?
Up. So associate planning board position, this is something we talked about last year that didn't necessarily make the cut. The idea here is similar to the ZBA. It allows the planning board and the town generally to have somebody available who is participating, who's able to slide in if there is an issue with quorum and so forth on a particular project, and serve in the capacity to keep the planning board moving along. In this particular case, for associate planning board members, it is just on when the planning board is acting as a special permit granting authority. It's not for all matters. It's just specific to special permits. And the town has a fair amount of discretion in terms of what the appointment process could look like for this position. It's not laid out statutorily. It's not like a local option that we'd adopt. We get to decide what that would look like. So obviously, planning board is an elected position. This would be an appointed position, but depending on what the board was inclined to move forward with, it could just be a board of selectmen appointment. It could be joint with the other members of the planning board. There's a fair amount of leeway that we would have in drafting the warrant article. Hence, wanting to discuss it tonight, because if there is general interest and support for it, we would then have to craft that with legal over the next week or two, so we, you know, could have something to put before you formally.
Well, we, excuse me, we clearly have precedent to show the benefits of an alternate or associate with our zoning board. This, I have to understand, and so I would support this. I do have to understand a little bit more about how that works if an associate is only an associate in a special permit situation. What is the associate then if they're here, it's a non-special permit situation? So
They're not an associate member then.
so they don't, so in a given meeting, if there are 3
Yep.
hearings, they
And one is seeking a special permit and
Right.
the other 2 aren't, then they
Right.
would only, you
sit
know,
there for 2 and leave, or,
the other, you know, things
So
that
I'm
we've
just-
talked about is, you know, planning board is a high bar. It's an elected position. It's a 5-year term. We have had issues recruiting folks. I think one of the situations we talked about, filling out papers the day that they were due, was for around a planning board position in years past. So this would also be a way to get somebody involved and exposed to those issues and have some experience to presumably, if a slot did come up, to, you know, one of the elected positions that, you know, that person could run for that seat.
I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of the Board of Selectmen appointing a person. I'm quite surprised that there's a dearth of applicants for the planning board. I know in other towns, other than the Board of Selectmen itself and perhaps the Finance Committee, the Planning Committee is the most, in fact, even more than the Finance Committee, the Planning Committee is the most popular sought-after committee assignment in almost all the small towns I'm familiar with, which is so kind of surprising that Wenham's kind of an outlier here. And we get the same people, well,
yeah, and I don't want to harp too much on my community engagement hat, soapbox, but I think that there's a general need for outreach relative to some of these positions. I think somehow we have to make people more aware that they exist, what they are, and encourage them. I think that's part of the issue. I think there's probably people out there willing to come forward, and we just haven't managed to tap them. So I agree with you. It is surprising.
That's a little touchy subject,
But I
because let's say
think
there's an esteemed planning board member, and let's say we go through a process 2 or 3 months prior to the elections, and there's an esteemed planning member whose term is up and wants to run for re-election. So it looks like the Board of Selectmen are trying to round up people to get them out. So that's, you know, I wouldn't want to be part of that.
No, when I say community engagement, I don't think that responsibility falls completely on the selectmen. I think there needs to be some avenue to get this information out to the public in a meaningful way that doesn't necessarily happen at this meeting or individually by one of us. I just think in general.
Well,
I'm
we have the same-
hoping to have more conversations about that in the
We have the
future.
same problem in the Finance Committee. It used to be a highly sought-after position in town. We'd have plenty of applicants, and we had 6 members, not 5. And those 6 members generally stayed for all 6 years. They had the 2 3-year terms. And now, you know, it's uncommon for anybody to stay 6 years, and that people are dropping off, and that they have a hard time rounding up. I think we had 3 vacancies. We had 3 applicants, and we appointed all 3. That was
Right.
That's a really, you know,
Right.
what a process that is.
Yeah. No, I
Not
think
saying
there
anything
is-
against the
I
3,
think
but
that's-
nevertheless, in years past, we would have had many more applicants for the positions, and that,
Right.
so I don't think that the Planning Committee is necessarily unique in not having people interested in it.
No, and I don't think the town is unique necessarily. I think I see that on every volunteer board that I sit on. That it's
mean,
hard to-
Board
except
of-
for one that seems well-populated these days.
The Board of
others-
Assessors had a vacancy, and somebody was a writing candidate and got on.
I remember. Okay. All right.
Last
Anything more on that?
one, work our way back up, non-criminal disposition. So touched on earlier, the bottom line here is that this was part of the, our ongoing codification project. This, I think, really kind of jumped off the page to us. The working group that's been going through and looking at potential revisions as part of that. And really the issue here is that our non-criminal disposition bylaw as currently constituted doesn't cover a lot of fines that are listed in our bylaws. They're just there. but there's no way to enforce them. And so what this would do would be to basically be a stopgap to get us through for the next year or so, and say that anything and everything that's cited as a fine under our bylaws would be covered by this one new non-criminal disposition bylaw. So it's a catch-all that would say that's not to change all the fee structures, because there's we charge different fees for different things. We're not looking to change what the fees are, but just to say that they fall under the jurisdiction of non-criminal disposition when and if we were ever inclined to actually impose those fines or fees.
Sounds good to me.
On paper, it looks good.
Okay.
Again, my concern will be, aside from whether we think these are important or not, when we get down to it at the end and we look at everything that needs to happen at that town meeting, will we reasonably be able to put all of these?
Yeah, so all in right now, there are 28 warrant articles, including the election, so really 27 that are on the list, or that are items that we've discussed. That includes, still at this point, a couple different iterations around the budget, kind of a maximum amount around how we ultimately are going to present the FY20 budget. So that could very easily get down to 25. Talk to staff about, hierarchy in terms of importance and prioritization. And it sounds like at our next meeting, we can go through the list that, the updated cover sheet is included in the packet for everything that we've talked about to date. We don't anticipate anything new, obviously, going forward.
Okay, so should we spend a couple of minutes on the budget update, since that is really?
Yeah, and this is, the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen are going to be meeting on Thursday night. And so I would expect that there's going to be a fair amount of discussion on that at this point. I think this is really just to say, we had our joint meeting with Hamilton, the schools, a week ago tonight. And at that time, we presented to the schools that we could accommodate $135,000 of increased assessment in our FY20 budget for the schools, and that the balance of the increase in their assessment, $559,000, at this point is planned to be structured as a operating override for the schools, similar to how it was structured last year, higher amount, but similar structure, and that that also represented some significant lack of funding for a number of identified needs on the town side. So that's not funding any new capital, which is just under $200,000 of identified need, and not funding just under $200,000 of new operating expenses in terms of staffing, some expense line, and some compensation adjustments outside of COLA and so forth.
You skipped over the schools, but I had an idea I shared with you and Catherine.
Yep.
That I think that the $250,000 for OBRA, which would be $250,000 this year, $500,000 next year, $7.75 the year after, and so on and so forth, be a separate, carved out of the $559,000, which is a proposed operating override for the schools, and make it its own separate operating override.
Yeah, and that's on the list of potential warrant articles under the next tab. I have that listed right now as a potential separate school operating override. Our share of the $250,000 is $90,000 or thereabouts. And then the school resource officer, which was also discussed at length at that joint meeting, our share of that cost, the $73,000 cost, is $26,000.
Yeah, I think there should be a separate warrant article on that. I've heard from citizens in town, one this morning, that I think it's a big mistake for a small town like this to have a resource officer, plus particularly since there's no job description for this, and there's a dueling between the town of Hamilton and the school district about who this person reports to. The Hamilton believes the police officer, which is this, what the person is going to be, should report to the police chief or somebody in the police department as opposed to the superintendent of schools or somebody underneath him. I think that's and they were not happy with the outcome of not winning their point at this joint meeting. So, and I think that some people just might not want to fund a school or have a person as a SRO, school resource officer, period. And so that I think this isolates it out and let the townspeople decide whether or not the situation warrants this position.
And my understanding in talking to the Hamilton town manager is that Hamilton plans to abide by their position that was taken last week, which is that they think it should be a town of Hamilton employee, and they're going to plan to include funding for it in their budget. I don't know that the schools are going to change their position from last week to tomorrow night, so there may be funding for the position in both the Hamilton budget and in the school budget, which, to your point, if we split that out as a separate warrant article, may resolve itself the morning of town meeting over in Hamilton one way or another.
It may, but if it doesn't, I still think the townspeople in Wenham should have an opportunity to voice their opinion on this school resource officer and decide whether or not it's warranted for this, two small towns.
And in either of those scenarios, whether the town chooses to not support it, or there's one Hamilton and the schools that doesn't get resolved, there's a benefit, to Jack's point, I think, to having it completely separate, because it carves it out from the school budget in particular. We don't want to be in a situation where we're amending the school budget because of the SRO in an article, either
On the fly,
either from
Right.
from an override, or because either of those would potentially negate the school budget. I don't quite know how the town and the school are going to resolve that, but so I don't disagree with that. The only are you set? There's one other comment. There was that night, the night of that meeting, I thought a little stronger reaction from the school, the assistant superintendent for finance and administration, a little bit stronger reaction to the override, the potential $500,000 override from the schools than there was last year. And I think it's important the school committee will be voting their budget tomorrow night. I just think it's important that we reiterate from the town side that our financial situation is what's driving what seems to be a relatively, to them, perhaps a small amount that's being funded of the schools, that this is not we don't like the school, so we're not giving you money. This is, we're not even funding level services under our levy limit, and this is all that we have. So I just want that point to be clear. I'm hoping people are hearing that, and I'm hoping people hear that tomorrow night, so that there isn't, the intention is not to create divisiveness. It's just a financial reality, I think. So that's my editorial comment on that. And I think next Thursday, we'll be able to talk about priorities for.
Yeah, I think that's the one remaining issue, is whether there's any appetite to fund some of those, priority increases on the town side that aren't currently included in the level services budget, whether they be staffing, expense, or capital. Total is $370,000 or thereabouts. Certainly can't fund it at that amount because that would require a town operating override.
Right.
So it would have to be on the order of $100,000 really, or less. And then, another topic that I brought up before that the Finance Committee has discussed a couple times now is that special purpose stabilization fund and an operating override specific to that to fund the cost of the enrollment shift, and whether there is interest and support for moving forward with that.
Okay.
Those are the two major issues to be discussed on Thursday.
Do you have anything else? So just before we adjourn, I think we should make the decision at least on whether we think we're going to need a meeting next week. We don't have to necessarily set the day or the time right now, but do we want Peter to propose a couple of,
I think you should call around and find out our availability, and then
Yeah.
you can make that decision. Are you going to be there Thursday?
I will be there Thursday.
I will too. So we can make the
yeah,
final decision Thursday.
Yeah, it just feels like
I think we need,
we're going to need it.
I
And,
think so.
And we'll have to do it on a time, obviously, that we're available, but just to give Peter the heads up. Okay.
Plus, we have to reschedule the photo op though, right?
Priorities, Jack, you've got your priorities straight.
Yeah. I was hoping we could forget about that.
I was hoping we could
Thursday,
forget
right?
about it too.
Yeah.
Can I just
Are we
Photoshop one of my photos from about 20 years ago? and
Yeah,
put it in
really.
there?
So are we planning on doing that on Thursday?
Well,
I need to know.
All of you are gonna be here. It's a matter
Oh.
of if John's gonna be well.
So we'll see.
we'll see how John's feeling.
I'll just wait till Thursday morning to get
Yeah,
that
yeah.
update, to get
Give me an alert
so I can get the, to the
notify
the
my
spa
barber and my
that day.
cosmetician.
Okay, if there's no other
I move that we
business,
adjourn.
I second that motion. All in favor? Aye. We're